I am still trembling hours later, but I know exactly where the story begins. It begins with the red wine and the words my mother-in-law Helen used to cut me down in front of everyone. My mother-in-law told the whole family that I am the street trash he picked up, she announced, her voice perfectly pitched to carry across the long mahogany table. That single moment, the liquid still dripping from my hair and staining my white holiday sweater, summed up the 3 years I have been married to her son, Gavin. Let me back up, because this did not start at Christmas. This is a story about money, class, and the kind of malice that only old wealth can breed. I am Eliza. I married Gavin 3 years ago, after we met at university. His family is the definition of old Virginia money. Country clubs, debutante balls, and a lineage they can trace back to the Revolutionary War. I grew up in a regular neighborhood, raised by a single mother who worked 2 jobs. I had never seen a house with a circular driveway until I met Gavin. Gavin swore his family would love me, but his mother, Helen Vance, made it clear from day one that I was a peasant who had trapped her precious boy. She had spent years dropping subtle, calculated barbs. Once, she told Gavin's sister, Savannah, that I probably poked holes in condoms to get pregnant. We do not even have children yet, which is why when I miscarried 2 years ago at 8 weeks, Helen told people at her garden club that I probably made it up for attention. Gavin heard about it, confronted her, and she simply smiled and said, "Well, if there had been a real pregnancy, surely there would have been a real baby." The cruelty was always delivered with a smile. But Christmas dinner was the main event. Helen hosts this massive dinner every year at their colonial house in the West End. She had been texting Gavin for weeks about how we needed to come early to help set up, which, of course, meant she wanted me in the kitchen with the caterers while everyone else drank champagne in the living room. I told myself, fine, whatever, I can handle being treated like staff. What I could not handle was getting there and seeing Patrick Delaney, Gavin's ex-boyfriend, sitting in the living room like family. Patrick is everything Helen wanted for Gavin. His family owns half the vineyards in Charlottesville. He went to the right college. He knows which fork to use for the oysters. They dated for 2 years before university, and I am not kidding when I say Helen still has their prom photo on her mantle. I walked in, and Patrick gave me a perfectly smooth smile and said, "Oh, Eliza, Helen did not tell me you would be here." That was such blatant nonsense, because Helen had obviously invited him specifically to torment me. Gavin looked as confused as I was and asked his mother what was happening. Helen simply breezed past him, saying, "Patrick is family, and always will be." The dinner setup was where things escalated. Helen had placed cards at the long, formal dining table. I watched her put Patrick's card right next to Gavin's seat. My card was placed at the far end of the table, near the swinging door that led to the kitchen. I spoke up, trying to keep my voice even. "Hey, Helen, I think there has been a mistake with the seating." She turned, her face a mask of polite contempt. "No mistake, dear. I seated everyone exactly where they belong." Gavin, who was already furious about Patrick, grabbed the cards and started switching them around. That is when Helen exploded. She started shouting about how I have ruined every family event with my presence, how I have no class or breeding. She said I dressed like I shopped at a gas station and talked like I never finished high school. Gavin started yelling back, while his father, Charles, sat quietly trying to calm the storm. Helen kept going, focused entirely on me. She said Gavin was the most promising of all her children until he met me. She claimed I got my hooks in him and dragged him down to my level. Then she looked at me with a chilling smirk and said, "When I see you near the kitchen, it is because that is where you are comfortable, is not it?" With the help, I was trying so hard not to cry because I knew that is exactly what she wanted. Gavin said we were leaving immediately, but Helen delivered the final blow. If we left, we would be uninvited from all future family events, not just asked to skip them, but banned. She reminded Gavin right there, in front of everyone, that his trust fund is controlled by his parents until he is 35. She warned that if we left, she would make sure Charles cut off his access. So, we stayed. I sat in my assigned seat at the end of the table near the kitchen. But it gets worse. Helen had not even put a regular upholstered dining chair there for me. She had brought up one of the plastic patio chairs from the garage, and that is what I sat on while everyone else had the comfortable, cushioned seats. Savannah noticed and looked horrified, but did not say anything. Gavin's brother Archie just smirked like he thought it was hilarious. Dinner was 2 hours of hell. Patrick kept touching Gavin's arm and laughing at his jokes. Helen directed all conversation through Patrick, asking him about his new job, complimenting his dress, and talking about old times when he and Gavin were together. Every time I tried to join the conversation, Helen talked over me or ignored me completely. The wine throwing happened during dessert. Helen was telling a story about a charity gala, mentioned that it was black tie formal, and looked directly at me. Of course, Eliza would not know what that means, since I do not think she owns anything appropriate for real society events. I had finally had enough. Actually, Helen, I know exactly what black tie means, and I have been to plenty of formal events. She laughed, actually laughed in my face. Oh, sweetie, the Olive Garden does not count as formal dining. I snapped. I told her I was sick of her talking about me like I was dirt she scraped off her shoe. I said I was not going anywhere, and she needed to accept that I was Gavin's wife. She had been trying to humiliate me since the day we met, and it needed to stop. Helen stood up, picked up her full glass of red wine, walked down to my end of the table, and dumped the entire thing on my head. Red wine all over my white sweater, my hair, my face. Then she leaned down and whispered the words that burned me more than the cold liquid. Servants do not have opinions, dear. You are here because Gavin feels sorry for you. Then she delivered the line I will never forget. My mother-in-law told the whole family that I am the street trash he picked up, and we are all just waiting for him to take out the trash. I just sat there with wine dripping off my chin. Helen walked back to her seat as if nothing had happened. Gavin jumped up, yelling that she had crossed every possible line, but Helen calmly insisted that if I was going to be disrespectful in her home, I deserved to be put in my place. I got up and walked numbly to the bathroom to clean up the mess. I felt the familiar weight of Gavin's failure to stand up for me, a financial anchor around his neck that pulled him down into his mother's demands. The chill that seeped into the car on the drive home was nothing compared to the cold realization that my mother's threats had actually worked. Gavin drove in a stiff, miserable silence, broken only by his repeated apologies, which felt less like genuine remorse and more like attempts to wipe away the scene with meaningless words. He kept circling back to the trust fund. It is not just the money, Eliza, he insisted, gripping the steering wheel. It is everything. My career prospects, the house we want to buy. My mother controls access to the right people. I looked at my reflection in the window, the faint pink stain still visible on my hairline, and I finally spoke. She threw wine on me, Gavin. She called me street trash and told you to take out the garbage. She made you pose for romantic photos with Patrick while I stood in the corner like furniture. Gavin immediately grew defensive. She is wrong, I know that, but she has always been difficult. We just need to find a way to manage her. If we just stay quiet for a few weeks, she will calm down. It is always like this. I felt the deep, terrible chill of betrayal. He was not processing the abuse. He was processing the financial setback of losing his entitlement. He spent the entire night rationalizing Helen's behavior, saying we needed to be practical, and that his mother's cruelty was simply the price of admission to his world. The next morning, the assault continued. Helen began texting Gavin, not apologizing, but demanding one from me. She wrote long, measured messages about how I had disrespected her in her own home and how she would not tolerate my vulgarity. She even had the audacity to write that Patrick would have been the perfect daughter-in-law, and it was not too late for Gavin to fix his mistake. She wrote that I was pulling him away from his real family and his potential. I watched Gavin read these texts, his face pale and stressed, and I realized he was not fighting her, he was being worn down by her. The final, calculated shot landed 3 days later. I was on my laptop when I saw the Instagram post. It was a photo from the dinner, one of the pose shots Helen had forced. It showed Patrick and Gavin holding hands, looking perfectly happy and comfortable. The caption was sickeningly sweet, always grateful for this family and their love. Helen had commented with heart emojis. I was not tagged, and I was not even visible because of how Helen had positioned everyone. People were commenting, asking if they were back together. This solidified my understanding. This was not just abuse. It was a strategy to replace me. The situation escalated when Helen sent Gavin a formal, written list of expectations for me if I wanted to attend future family events. It arrived as a formal email, a work memo, and she had carbon copied Charles. The bullet points were unbelievable. They included appropriate formal attire at all times, no speaking unless directly addressed by a senior family member, no contradicting family elders, and finally, acknowledgement of my lower social standing and the privilege of my inclusion. Gavin was livid, or perhaps finally embarrassed. He called her immediately, and they had a massive fight where she told him that none of this would be happening if he had just married Patrick. Yesterday, Gavin told me his parents wanted to have a meeting with both of us to discuss, and he actually used the phrase, "my behavior," at Christmas dinner. My behavior. I stared at him, like I am the one who threw wine and called people street garbage. He backtracked immediately, saying he did not mean I was wrong, just that we needed to apologize to Helen to keep the peace. Just let her feel like she won Eliza, he pleaded. We can move past this. There is no moving past this. I told him the wine stain a permanent sharp memory. Your mother threw wine in my face in front of 30 people. She put me on a plastic chair. And your solution is for me to bow down and take it so your trust fund stays intact. He got upset. It is not just about the money, he argued, the strain showing on his face. It is about maintaining family relationships. Cutting her off completely would destroy the whole family dynamic. What family dynamic? I asked him, leaning in. The one where everyone pretends I do not exist. Or the one where they openly mock me for not being rich enough? He did not have an answer. He just kept repeating that the meeting could be a chance to set boundaries and make things better. I knew exactly what was going to happen. Helen was going to list all the ways I had failed her standards, demand that I fall in line, and threaten to cut Gavin off financially if I did not comply. And Gavin would sit there, torn between his wife and his trust fund. He was trying to find a solution that did not destroy our financial future, but he was failing to see that his mother was actively trying to destroy our marriage. I clung to the hope that this meeting could somehow resolve things, but the sight of Patrick waiting for us in the drawing room shattered that fragile expectation. Against every instinct I had, I went. Gavin was absolutely convinced that if we just showed up and were agreeable, Helen would relent and we could regain some semblance of peace. We arrived at the colonial house at about 2 o'clock in the afternoon. The same massive house, the same circular driveway. Charles, Gavin's father, opened the door, gave me only the briefest, neutral nod, and led us into the formal living room. Helen was already positioned in a high, back, deeply cushioned chair, like a queen on a throne. She had staged the entire scene for maximum psychological impact, a silver tea service set up on a mahogany coffee table, actual china cups, and little sandwiches arranged meticulously on a 3-tiered stand. It was a perfect, rigid scene designed to remind me that I did not belong. Gavin and I sat on the couch across from her. Charles took the chair immediately next to Helen, creating a united front. Before anyone could speak, I heard footsteps on the stairs, and Patrick walked into the room. Gavin's face went white. He stammered, "What is he doing here?" Helen offered a small, triumphant smile. "Patrick is part of this family, Gavin, and he has every right to be present for family discussions." Patrick sat down in the chair on Helen's other side and gave me a look of practiced sympathy that made my hands clench. I said, my voice tight and low, "I am not doing this with him here." "Then you are welcome to leave, Eliza," Helen replied, without missing a beat. "But Gavin will be staying, because we have important matters to discuss about his future." Gavin finally stood up for me, a flicker of his old self returning. "If Eliza leaves, I leave. That would be very foolish," Helen warned him, her voice suddenly edged with steel, "considering what is at stake." Charles spoke up, trying for a diplomatic tone. He said they had asked us here to address the situation from Christmas and find a path forward. Helen immediately interrupted him. "No," she corrected, fixing her gaze on me. "We asked you here to discuss Eliza's unacceptable behavior and what consequences there need to be." She looked directly at me. "You embarrassed the family in front of 30 guests by raising your voice and causing a scene." I could not believe the sheer audacity. "Helen, you threw wine in my face." You called me street garbage. You made me sit on a plastic chair while your son held hands with his ex-boyfriend. She waved her hand, dismissing my list of grievances as if swatting away a fly. I reacted to your disrespect. You spoke to me in a tone that no one uses in my home. The seating arrangements were perfectly reasonable, and the photographs were simply maintaining family traditions. Patrick interjected then, his tone smooth and regretful. He said he understood this must be difficult for me, but Helen had explained that including him in family events was important for Gavin's well-being. Gavin and I have history and connections that cannot just be erased because he made an impulsive marriage, he said. Impulsive. We had been together for 5 years. Gavin told Patrick he needed to stay out of this, but Helen overruled him. She said Patrick had a valuable perspective on what Gavin needed in a partner, and that he understood the family's expectations and standards in a way I clearly never would. Then she turned her full attention to her son, laying the guilt on thick. You have been struggling ever since you married her. You have been pulled away from family. Your career has not progressed the way it should have. You are constantly stressed about money. Gavin fired back. That is not because of Eliza. That is because you cut off my trust fund access and make everything conditional. I have maintained your access just fine, Helen retorted. But your poor decisions have consequences. If you had married appropriately, you would have full access to everything by now. Instead, you are stuck trying to support a lifestyle your wife cannot contribute to properly. Excuse me, I said, finally losing my temper. I work full-time and contribute equally to our household. Helen actually laughed, a short, sharp sound. Darling, let us not pretend your income is significant. In our world, wives are expected to bring social connections and family standing, not just a paycheck from a strip mall. Charles tried to intervene again, whispering, Helen, maybe we should focus on solutions rather than criticisms. She shot him a look, and he immediately shrank back into silence. She then laid out what she called the path forward. She explained that Gavin could maintain his position in the family and his trust fund access if he agreed to 4 strict conditions. First, I would attend family events only when specifically required, and I would observe proper protocols, including not speaking unless addressed directly by senior family members. Second, Gavin would attend major family events solo so he could properly network and maintain family relationships without distraction. Third, our living arrangements would be re-evaluated because our current apartment was not appropriate for someone of Gavin's standing. The 4th condition, she explained, was simply that I had to acknowledge my place. Absolutely not, I said, standing up. We are not agreeing to any of that. Helen's eyes were cold. You are not being asked to agree, Eliza. You are being told what the requirements are. Gavin can choose his marriage or his family, but he cannot have both unless you learn your place. She looked at Gavin, pressing the pressure point. You are 32 years old. You should be practicing architecture at the highest level. How exactly do you plan to provide the life you promised her without family support? Gavin was silent. I could see him doing the financial math in his head, the student loans, the credit cards, the impossible cost of living we carried to maintain his standing. Patrick, seeing Gavin's hesitation, jumped in. I would hate to see you throw away your potential, Gavin. When we were together, you were so driven, so focused. Sometimes love is not enough if the partnership is not lifting both people up. I wanted to hit him. I told Gavin we were leaving. He did not move. Gavin, let us go. We are not listening to this anymore. See, Charles, Helen said, smiling because she knew she was winning. This is exactly the problem. She cannot handle adult conversations about reality. She wants you to throw away your entire future for what? Some romantic notion of true love. She knows you are going to resent her eventually. When the money runs out and the bills pile up, she will be the anchor around your neck. As I was grabbing my coat, trying to keep from sobbing, Savannah walked in. She must have been listening nearby. She looked furious. Mom, what are you doing? Helen stiffened. This does not concern you, Savannah. It does concern me, Savannah said, ignoring her mother. I have watched you do this for years, and it has gotten completely out of control. You threw wine on her at Christmas. You made her sit on a plastic chair. You are literally trying to buy Gavin away from his wife right now. Helen's face went cold, and she turned her weapons on her daughter. If you cannot contribute productively to this conversation, you need to leave. You want to lecture me about family dynamics when Charles and I are covering your recent credit card statements, when your job barely pays minimum wage. Savannah went red, but she stood her ground. That is different. It is not different at all. Helen spat back. The family supports members who uphold family values and excludes those who do not. If you want to continue receiving support, you will remember where your loyalty needs to be. Savannah looked at Gavin, her eyes pleading. Are you really going to let them do this? Are you going to choose money over Eliza? Gavin did not answer. He just stood there, looking completely broken, and I realized he was actually considering it. Driving home alone, the silence in the car was heavy with the weight of my impending failure. I had demanded a choice, and Gavin was paralyzed by the consequences. When I got back to our apartment, I sat on the edge of the bed for a long time, the only sound the frantic ringing of Gavin's phone, as his mother continued to barrage him with threats and ultimatums. When he finally returned, he looked like a ghost. He tried to start the conversation calmly, analytically, as if we were discussing a business merger and not the death of our marriage. He needed me to understand the practical realities of our situation. Eliza, we cannot just ignore our financial situation. He began stripping off his expensive suit jacket. The trust fund is everything. It is collateral for future loans. It ensures our future children go to the right schools. If we lose it now, we lose everything. You are worried about the schools of children we do not have. I countered, my voice flat, while your mother is actively trying to destroy the relationship we do have. There is no compromise here, Gavin. Your mother wants you to choose between your wife and her money. She made that abundantly clear by seating her preferred partner at the table. He got frustrated, running a hand through his hair. It is not that simple. You are being unrealistic about money. We cannot just survive on pride and principles. My student loan payment is due in 2 weeks. We have barely $400 in our checking account. We need their help. We fought for 3 solid hours. He kept insisting we needed to be practical, and I kept saying his mother was attempting to break us up, and he was letting her do it. He was focused on the dollar signs. I was focused on my dignity. For him, the choice was about survival. For me, the choice was about integrity. Finally, exhausted and defeated, he admitted his decision. He said he was going to the New Year's Eve party, whether I came or not, because he needed to maintain some family relationships. My heart went numb, and Patrick will be there. I stated not as a question, but as a confirmation. Probably, he admitted quickly, avoiding my gaze, but that is not the point. It is exactly the point, Gavin, I whispered. Your mother is using him to replace me, and you are too worried about the money to see it, or perhaps you are using the money as an excuse not to fight her. That was 4 days ago. Since then, he has barely spoken to me. He is sleeping on the couch, leaving for work before I wake up, and coming home late. The emotional distance is immense. I could hear him on the phone with his brother Archie, trying to explain his position. I later saw a text from Savannah, where she replied that she understood his position even though she disagreed with it. Even his sister, who had just defended me, thought his fear of losing the money was a legitimate reason to consider his mother's terms. Then, this morning, a small, painful interaction solidified the narrative Helen was building. I ran to the local grocery store near our apartment. I was standing by the fresh produce when Helen's friend, Mrs. Davies, the president of her garden club, rounded the corner. She smiled brightly. "Eliza," she chirped, "I heard such wonderful news!" Helen mentioned that Gavin is coming to New Year's Eve after all. Isn't that wonderful? She said you two were just working through some differences, and she hoped you could resolve them maturely. I just stared at her, the carton of eggs suddenly feeling heavy in my hand. Helen was already spreading the narrative I was the immature, difficult wife who was causing differences, and Gavin was the sensible one who was putting his family first. I was the problem that was holding him back from his responsibilities. I hurried home, feeling sick. He was packing a bag. He had pulled out his best suit, the one he only wore for the Big Vance family functions. "What are you doing?" I asked, though I knew the answer. "I am going to stay at Archie's place for a few days," he said, zipping the bag closed. "I need some space." I need to clear my head. Is this it? I asked. My voice did not shake. It was perfectly steady, which felt strangely terrifying. Are you choosing them? He looked miserable, but his eyes were hard. I am not choosing anyone, Eliza. I am trying to figure out how to make everything work. It does not work, I said, stepping closer. Your mother made that crystal clear. You cannot have both. He left anyway. So now I am sitting here alone, staring at the perfectly pressed jacket he packed, which confirms his attendance at the party. I am wondering if my marriage just ended because I would not let my mother-in-law treat me like trash in exchange for money. He is texting me, still saying he just needs time to think. But I know what is happening. Helen is in his ear talking about our debt. Patrick is probably being sympathetic and available. And I am supposed to just sit here and wait while he decides if I am worth giving up his trust fund for. The New Year's Eve party is tomorrow night. I know he is going, which means he will be there with Patrick, while Helen parades them around, and I will be sitting at home like the wife who was not good enough to bring. I cannot be patient anymore. I cannot wait while his family actively works to destroy our marriage, and he stands there considering their offers. This is so much worse than I thought it would be. A part of me wanted to wait, to be the patient, good wife Helen said I was incapable of being, but my pride finally outweighed my fear. I had spent 4 days staring at that packed bag, and in that time, I understood that Gavin had already made his choice. He had chosen the possibility of a compromise where he lost his wife, over the certainty of a conflict where he lost his money. New Year's Eve morning, I decided I was done waiting. I was done being the silent victim positioned near the kitchen. I got dressed, not in a desperate effort to appear or appropriate for Helen's standards, but in the sharpest, most confident outfit I owned. I drove the 40 miles straight to Helen's house in the late afternoon. I walked right past the valet and into the massive entrance hall. Helen was there, greeting a group of guests, her expression the picture of gracious Southern hospitality. She saw me and her eyes went wide, the composure momentarily cracking. She could not make a scene with 30 people watching her, so she simply compressed her lips into a thin line of fury. I smiled, a genuine, cold smile, and walked deeper into the party. I found Gavin by the library fireplace, talking to Patrick. They were standing close, their posture relaxed, looking perfectly aligned and comfortable in their expensive surroundings. When Gavin saw me, his face went from easy contentment to pure panic. "Eliza, what are you doing here?" he asked, his voice low and urgent. "I thought we agreed I should come alone." "We agreed nothing," I corrected him, moving past him to say a polite hello to Patrick. "I am your wife, Gavin. I attend family events." Helen quickly took control of the room, using her social power to isolate me. She positioned Patrick next to Gavin all night, making sure everyone saw me as the crasher, the unwelcome intruder. She physically turned her back to me when I tried to speak to other guests. When dinner was announced, I watched the flurry around the long, formal table. There was no place card for me, of course. Patrick was seated right next to Gavin. I walked straight up to the table, grabbed an empty chair from the side, and slid it in between 2 vacant places a few seats down from Gavin. Helen's voice was sharp. "Eliza, there has been a mistake. The overflow table is set up in the garden room. You need to move." "No, Helen," I replied, sitting down firmly. "I will sit here." She turned to Charles, her voice rising in cold command. "Charles, please remove her." Charles shifted uncomfortably in his chair, then mumbled that he thought perhaps it was best to just let it go. She then turned to Archie, who hesitated, looking at me. Finally, Gavin spoke up, standing halfway out of his chair. "Everyone stop," he said, his voice strained. "Just sit down." The conversation at dinner, as expected, flowed around me like water around a stone. It all focused on the Vance lineage, Patrick's new business venture, and Helen's endless charities. I sat there, listening, observing the intricate, coded language of their world that I would never truly grasp. It was during the toast that Patrick delivered the final, crushing truth. Helen had just finished a toast about the importance of family loyalty. Patrick raised his glass, looked at Gavin and said, "It is good to see Gavin here, standing strong." Helen confided in me recently that his marriage was struggling, and he had even expressed some doubts about whether he had made the right choice. I felt the entire room focus on me, then on Gavin. I looked at Gavin, waiting for the denial, the fierce defense. Instead, he just looked down at his plate. "Did you tell your mother you had doubts about marrying me?" I asked, my voice dangerously calm. His face was everything. The guilt, the shame, the panic. He admitted it. He said it was just one conversation, a few months back, when we were fighting about money after that huge student loan payment came due. While I was at home, sleepless, figuring out how we could manage financially, he was telling his mother he regretted marrying someone who could not secure his financial future. Helen interrupted, seizing the moment. She insisted that Gavin had come to her multiple times, expressing concern about maintaining his lifestyle with someone from my background. She claimed she had only been facilitating a graceful way for him to correct his mistake, to get him back on the right path with Patrick. The final piece clicked into place. The wine, the plastic chair, the seating arrangement. It was all a calculated, years-long plot, and Gavin had provided her with the emotional leverage by admitting his doubt. I stood up slowly. I grabbed my coat. There was nothing left to say. Savannah, who had been sitting across the table, immediately stood up too. "I am leaving with Eliza," she announced to the room, grabbing her own purse. Helen started to object, but I walked out and Savannah followed me. We got into her car, and I told her to drive to our apartment. We packed my bags that night. We loaded my clothes, my books, and the few small pieces of furniture that were explicitly mine. I did not take the coffee maker, the lamp, or the throw pillows Helen would later claim I had stolen. I just took what was necessary for my own life. Savannah helped me load the car in silence. She hugged me tight before I left. "You are doing the right thing, Eliza," she whispered. "I wish I had your courage." I drove all the way to my mother's house in Norfolk, arriving after 3 in the morning. I thought that was the end. I thought I had walked away clean, choosing my dignity over a life of constant humiliation. I thought I had escaped the Vance world. I was wrong. The Vances do not let go of something they feel entitled to, even if that something is their son's wife. I thought driving away was the end, but Helen needed one final, dramatic act of cruelty to assert her dominance. I had been at my mother's house in Norfolk for a week, sleeping soundly for the first time in months. Gavin had been texting constantly, apologizing, asking for counseling, begging me to come back so we could work things out. Helen was texting him demanding he fix things immediately. I ignored all of them. I was trying to find the quiet space to process 4 years of accumulated venom. The invasion happened yesterday afternoon. I was in my mother's small, sunlit kitchen, making tea, when there was a sudden, sharp knock at the door. My mother, Maria, answered it. Her face, usually so open, tightened with confusion, then disbelief. Then I heard Helen's voice. "I need to speak with Eliza about the situation with Gavin," Helen announced, her tone imperious, as if she were addressing a subordinate at the country club. She had driven 90 minutes, all the way from the West End, to come to my mother's front porch. My mother, immediately recognizing the danger, tried to close the door. Helen, incredibly, put her hand on the frame to stop it, insisting, "This concerns my son's future, and I am not leaving until we have an adult conversation." I walked to the door, my heart pounding with a sudden, furious rage I had not felt since the wine incident. "What the hell are you doing at my mother's house, Helen?" She looked past me into the small, neat entryway, inspecting the interior of our home with an air of clinical judgment. She explained that we needed to discuss separation terms, claiming I had filed paperwork without consulting Gavin properly. Then she pulled out an actual printed document, a formal list. "The family has consulted with our attorney," she said, her voice dry and formal, "and we have concerns about how you are handling property. Specifically, this list details items you have taken from the apartment that belonged to Gavin or were purchased with family money." I squinted at the paper she held. The coffee maker, throw pillows, a cheap reading lamp, items of negligible value. She had driven 90 miles to threaten me over a coffee maker. My mother lost it. Her working class, Norfolk pride surged. "Get off my porch with your ridiculous list, and stop harassing my daughter." Helen completely ignored her, continuing to speak to me about how I was being vindictive and unreasonable. She warned that if I insisted on being difficult, they would pursue legal action for the theft of property. I laughed, a sharp, disbelieving sound that startled even myself. You drove all the way out here to threaten me overthrow pillows. Helen snapped that it was not about the value of the items. It is about you understanding that actions have consequences. You have taken property that does not belong to you. My mother stepped between us, her spine straight. She told Helen she had 10 seconds to leave before she called the police. Go ahead and call them. Helen retorted, unflustered. I will be happy to explain to law enforcement that Eliza has stolen property and abandoned her legal residence. My mother pointed out, she did not abandon anything, you miserable witch. She left an emotionally abusive situation that you created. Helen's face went cold, a look of pure menace. Abusive is a strong word, Maria, she said, using my mother's name for the first time, and you should be careful about making accusations that could be considered slander. Then she looked my mother up and down and remarked, I can see where Eliza learned her dramatic tendencies and lack of respect for social boundaries. My mother ordered her to get the hell off her property. Helen glanced around our small neighborhood, the contempt radiating off her like heat. This house is exactly what I expected, she observed, loud enough for the neighbors to hear. It explains so much about why Eliza never understood basic standards of behavior. I had wondered what kind of environment produced someone so grasping and inappropriate. I was done with her insulting me, but hearing her insult my mother and our home was the final breaking point. You can insult me all you want? I told her, my voice shaking with fury. But you are not going to stand on my mother's porch insulting my family and our home. Helen claimed she was simply observing that some people were raised with certain values and others were not. My mother walked right up to Helen, close enough that their faces were only inches apart. Listen, you miserable witch. My mother hissed, her voice low and dangerous. My daughter has more class and character in her little finger than your entire family combined. You have spent 4 years trying to break her down because you are a controlling nightmare who cannot stand that your son chose someone you cannot manipulate. Now, get off my property before I make you leave. Helen stepped back, momentarily stunned by the raw honesty. This explains everything, she declared. This level of hostility is clearly what Eliza was taught growing up. My mother responded, what I was taught was to stand up to bullies, and you are the biggest bully I have ever met. That is when Gavin's car pulled into the driveway. He jumped out looking stressed and exhausted and asked, what is going on here? Helen immediately turned to him, the victim narrative snapping back into place. She complained that I was being completely unreasonable and refusing to have a rational discussion. Why will you not just talk to my mother, Eliza? Gavin pleaded, already falling back into his role as mediator. I demanded to know why his mother was at my mother's house harassing us. Helen insisted she was not harassing anyone. She was protecting family assets. She pulled out the list again and started reading the items aloud. You can have all of it, I interrupted, raising my hands in surrender. Every single thing. You can have it. I do not want anything that reminds me of your family or the 4 years I spent being treated like trash. Gavin flinched, deeply hurt. Nobody treated you like trash, he protested weakly. My mother made a sound that was almost a laugh. Are you serious, Gavin? Your mother threw wine in her face and made her sit on a plastic patio chair at Christmas dinner. How much worse could it be than being called street garbage and having your ex-boyfriend positioned as her replacement at every family event? Gavin looked sick, muttering that I was making it sound worse than it was. Helen seized the opportunity to declare, enough of this. Eliza has poisoned everyone against me by playing the victim. You can see now, Gavin, why this marriage was never going to work. She comes from a family that thrives on drama instead of resolving issues properly. My mother's voice, usually so calm, was a razor when she ordered Helen off the property, and that's exactly when Gavin showed up. He stood there, trying to regain control of a scene that was far beyond his capacity to manage. He suggested we all go inside and talk calmly, insisting we needed to be mature. Is it mature? My mother asked him, planting her feet, for your mother to drive to Norfolk to threaten my daughter over household items, claiming she is a thief. Gavin defended his mother, claiming she was just trying to protect family assets. Helen, emboldened, pulled out her ridiculous list again and started reading off the items I had supposedly stolen. I told her she could have all of it. I reiterated, wary of the entire financial pretense, every single throw pillow and coffee maker. I want none of it? Gavin flinched again, protesting. Nobody treated you like trash, Eliza. Then how much worse could it be? My mother shot back. She called her street garbage and then made her sit on a plastic chair while you posed with your ex-boyfriend. You want to talk about maturity? That is abuse. Helen cut in, desperate to reclaim the dominant narrative. I have already addressed that. This is the problem, Gavin. She has poisoned everyone against me by playing the victim. My mother pointed out the obvious. The only person who thrives on drama is you, Helen, showing up uninvited to other people's homes with lists and threats. Helen retorted, her voice dripping with pure class contempt. At least I know how to conduct myself with dignity instead of screaming on front porches like trashy people. That is when Savannah's car pulled up. She rushed toward us, having clearly followed the escalating text message chain. Mom, what are you doing here? She demanded, instantly assessing the scene. Helen tried to minimize the situation, claiming she was trying to have an adult conversation. But clearly that was impossible with my family. Savannah rounded on her mother. You told me to leave Eliza alone! You have done enough damage. Helen turned her fury onto her daughter. I am disappointed, Savannah, that you are taking sides against your own family. Savannah stood firm. I am not taking sides. I am standing up for what is right. Gavin begged everyone to calm down. He looked at me, his eyes full of panic, and suggested we needed to figure out a way forward that did not involve his entire family falling apart. Your family is falling apart, I told him, because your mother cannot accept that you married someone she did not approve of. Helen insisted. I tried to accept it for 4 years. I tried to help her fit into our world, but she fought me at every turn. My mother stepped forward again, helped her fit in by humiliating her at every opportunity, by inviting his ex-boyfriend to family events, by telling people she trapped him with a fake pregnancy. Gavin's head snapped toward his mother. Did you really tell people that? Helen maintained a facade of denial. I expressed concerns to close friends about the circumstances of your marriage. Savannah interrupted, her voice tight with shame. She told half the garden club that Eliza poked holes in condoms. Gavin looked physically ill. Why would you say something like that? Helen declared that she had been trying to protect him from making a mistake, and clearly, she spat. I was right, because look where we are now. I told Gavin that this was exactly why I was done. His mother had spent years trying to destroy our marriage, and he had let her. Helen quickly interrupted, seizing his silence as proof. She claimed that actually, he had discussed divorce as an option several times, and she had been trying to help him see alternatives. Savannah yelled, Mom, stop lying! You have been planning this since they got engaged. I had nothing left to lose. I told Helen that my house and my neighborhood and my family were worth 100 of her fake, polite society friends. She was a miserable person who controlled everyone with money, because that was the only way she could keep people around. And Gavin had been so desperate for her approval that he had sacrificed his marriage for it. Helen declared, Finally, you are making sense. If you are done with this ridiculous display, we can discuss the separation terms. She had the papers her attorney prepared, very generous terms, she noted, considering the short marriage and the fact that you have contributed relatively little financially. My mother reached out, snatched the papers out of Helen's hand, and ripped them in half. She dropped the torn halves onto the driveway. My daughter has her own attorney and will not be signing anything your people prepared. Helen gasped, declaring that destroying legal documents was probably criminal. My mother responded that her daughter knew her worth and would not let people treat her like garbage. What did you raise, Helen? My mother asked, her voice laced with final judgment. A son who values money more than his wife. Gavin finally looked at me, a profound pain in his eyes. Helen confirmed, I thought your family lacked the breeding and background to understand our world, and I have been proven right. I told Gavin I was done. Done with his mother's insults and his inability to defend me. Helen declared, finally, Eliza is making sense. My mother ordered Helen off the property and warned that if she came back, she was filing a restraining order. Helen looked at Gavin, expecting him to do something to intervene, to save her. He just stood there. He did nothing. Gavin, Helen pressed, her voice cracking. "Are you going to let your wife and her family treat me this way?" He mumbled quietly that maybe she should go. Helen's face went white with shock and betrayal. "After everything I have done for you, all the support and the money, you are choosing them over me," Gavin murmured. "I am not choosing anyone. I am asking you to leave because this is out of control." Helen warned him, her voice suddenly fierce. "If I leave like this, things will change. The trust fund, the family support, all of it. Are you really willing to give all that up?" He did not answer. He just looked at the ground. Helen turned, got into her car, and sped out of the driveway, leaving us all standing there with the pieces of the shattered marriage scattered on the pavement. The ringing silence Helen left behind was quickly filled by the panicked texts on my phone, the sound of her trust fund collapsing. It has been 3 days since Helen left my mother's porch, vanquished not by wealth or social standing, but by a mother's refusal to be intimidated. Gavin finally drove away, following his mother's car after a final, hollow apology. The consequences were immediate and absolute. Helen had followed through on her threat. Gavin has been texting me constantly, describing the utter financial chaos. He is cut off completely. He is panicking about his 6-figure student loans, the apartment lease, and his complete lack of independent financial planning. He went from being a promising architect with family connections to a 32-year-old man who could not pay his own bills, all within 48 hours. Helen had systematically ensured his dependency, and now he was drowning. Helen also messaged him, claiming that I had turned her children against her and destroyed her family. She was the victim now, betrayed by her ungrateful son and his low-born wife. I read her messages and knew she would never take responsibility for her malice. I spent the first 2 days processing not the abuse, but Gavin's final, damning indecision. When his mother asked him if he was willing to give up the money, he paused. He was silent. That silence told me everything I needed to know about his priorities. He chose the possibility of wealth over the certainty of my love and respect. Yesterday, I filed for divorce. Gavin called me immediately after receiving the papers. He was crying, truly crying, and his voice was thick with desperation. He said we needed counseling. He swore he would cut off his family entirely, that he would do whatever it took to win me back. He pleaded that he had made a mistake, that he was just scared. I listened to him, and for the first time, I felt only pity, not anger. "It is too late, Gavin," I told him calmly. "When someone shows you who they are, believe them. You showed me that when the choice was between your wife and your money, you hesitated. Your mother was right about one thing: you chose the possibility of your trust fund. When someone will not defend you, that tells you everything." He tried to argue that he had asked Helen to leave, that he had finally stood up to her. "Yes," I conceded. "You asked her to leave, but only after she had already exhausted every avenue of cruelty on my mother's porch. You acted when there was no other choice but to acknowledge the scene was out of control, not when you realized she was destroying your marriage. That is a reaction, not a defense." He is still trying to figure out how to be an independent adult. He keeps sending me long messages about how he is starting over and asking if I will come back once he proves he can stand on his own feet. I know he will be fine eventually. He is smart, and he will figure out his career and his debt, but he will figure it out without me. My own life, here in my mother's quiet, clean house, feels simpler and far more valuable than the gilded cage I left behind. I realized that my self-worth was never tied to his family's approval. It was always tied to my refusal to compromise my dignity. I am building my own life now, a life where nobody gets to make me feel less than ever again, and that is a worth far greater than any trust fund Helen Vance ever controlled. My mother is preparing dinner, humming a tune, and the only tension in the air is the good kind, the expectation of a quiet, honest, and loving evening. I finally chose myself,